All right, great. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we'll let people come in as they get here. We are so excited to have this session today on ending gun violence with our wonderful facilitators from Amnesty International USA. They are definitely a powerhouse team. So I'm excited for each of you to learn from them tonight, but also for us to learn from each of you. Just a little bit on who we have here, and I'll let them introduce themselves even more when we get to them. But we have Ernest. He is the Ending Gun Violence Campaign Manager at Amnesty International USA. So he has done lots of work on eradicating all forms of gun violence, especially in Black and Brown communities, and in the legislative system, as well as a campaign manager, et cetera, in that space. So he's definitely one of our, I love his background, one of our everyday heroes out there working for good. And then we have Ebony, who is a human rights activist, as well as Amnesty International's legislative coordinator. She's a nonprofit organizer. She's a mom of gorgeous kids who you see in her video, and is just overall doing amazing things in the political system as well as for women in need. So we're so excited to hear from her tonight. And then lastly, we have Cynthia Gabriel Walsh. She's the director of human rights education at Amnesty International USA. Prior to this, she was part of the Peace Corps, as well as doing a lot of studies in her master's degree work and her undergraduate degree work, all wrapped up in dispute resolution and helping to basically do what she's doing now, which is leading out us here in the USA with human rights education. So we are so grateful to have them. Obviously, I can never do them justice for all of the good that they are doing in our community. So again, we're so grateful to have you three, and I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Cynthia, to further get us started.
Hi, Kaylee, thank you so much. Everyone, welcome. My name is Cynthia Gabriel Walsh, and I am coming to you from the North Shore of Boston on unceded territory of the Pennacook. I go by she, her pronouns. And I want to just acknowledge that we're very thankful to be here. And I want to just start the night off with a couple polls so we can catch the vibes of where folks are. It is, I don't know where you are, but where I am on the East Coast, it is a Monday night. So let's launch 2 polls just to sort of break some ice and get to know where folks are at and just be real. All right, if the poll is submitted, let's check out the results so we know exactly what page we're all on. Oh. All right. Oh, wow. I am very impressed. 71% have only been on Zoom 1 to 2 hours. And I need to know how you're able to do that because I'm really envious. So that's awesome. So tonight is going to be a fun Zoom experience. What's your energy level? I'm good for another hour or two. My energy is good. Wow. All right. We're all 57% there. For folks who should be in bed, I just want to say thank you. I get it. And just look at this. Well, for me, I'm looking at the center of the screen with Ebony and 2 gorgeous children, and I'm going to get my energy from those little nuggets right there. So thank you so much. That's so amazing. So let's start. Without further ado, we're going to launch right into this. We're here to learn more about end gun violence in the United States and Amnesty International's work on ending gun violence. Amnesty International is a global movement of people working to fight injustice and promoting human rights. Amnesty International has been around since 1961. We are a global organization. We're based in over 70 countries throughout the world. We have sections worldwide. We have members in over 150 countries. We are a grassroots organization. We work to build people power, leadership development throughout the world. And here, AIUSA, we're going to hone in on the work that we're doing around ending gun violence. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen for a quick video. Just bear with me as I do some of these transitions. Ah,
In cities across the country, there are heroes among us. Gun violence prevention experts and interrupters, conflict mediators, lifesavers, and essential.
can you hear?
leaders. Their work saves lives. But
Barely.
losing funds, and too many trained interrupters are working without a living wage. If we believe that Black lives matter and that we all deserve to live free from the
1 minute, please.
Let me try from my end, Cynthia.
We can't hear it, Cynthia.
So sorry. Ernest, can we play it from your video?
Yeah, let me see if I can get it.
Let me put you as co-host or Kayla.
I can share. I have a capability.
Right.
In cities across the country, there are heroes among us. Gun violence prevention experts and interrupters, conflict mediators, lifesavers, and essential community leaders. Their work saves lives. But programs are losing funds, and too many trained interrupters are working without a living wage. If we believe that Black lives matter and that we all deserve to live free from the fear of gun violence, it's time to give these heroes the backing they deserve. Together, we can end gun violence in my city, in yours, and everywhere else. Let's get to work.
Thank you, Ernest. Sorry about that. I'm having some technical difficulties over here. So that is our Heroes campaign. We're going to learn more about this campaign in this session tonight. This is our leading campaign that we've been working on, and Ernest has really been leading the way on with our grassroots activists, and Ebony McClace has also been leading the way on this very much in the state of Connecticut. So we're going to talk about this tonight. And right now I'm just going to share with you some slides that we have for this evening, and we'll make these slides available to folks as well. So let me try the second charm here. Folks have the ability to see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So here we go, End Gun Violence Workshop. So just some community agreements that we like to share. We'll just give folks a minute to just take a glance at these. We welcome this an inclusive space. We strive to make everything accessible. If you need closed captions, they're available on the Zoom line. We also ask folks to definitely feel free to step in, ask questions, and also just to also be courteous of each other in this discussion as well. And if possible, if you can mute when you're not speaking, that would be great. And feel free to also use the chat if you have questions, although we also are going to have a Q&A. So we invite you to also, come off chat at a certain point and ask questions. And then, feel free to use the chat right now just to introduce yourself, maybe where you're from and your name. That'd be great. Tonight, we're going to understand, these are the learning objectives for the session tonight. We're going to understand why the U.S. gun violence crisis is a human rights issue, understand the impact of gun violence on individuals and communities in the United States, in particularly communities of color, women, children, and individuals who are at risk of harming themselves or others. And we're going to work to change gears in our second part of this workshop to really do some skill building development and provide you all with information on how to get locally and nationally involved in efforts to end gun violence. So our agenda tonight is why gun violence is a human rights crisis. We're going to talk about the overall human rights framework that we use at Amnesty International. This is also a framework that is supported by international human rights law. What are government's responsibilities, really looking at the US government's responsibility, the impact of gun violence on individuals in communities in the US. We're going to talk a little bit more about our Heroes campaign. We just shared with you that quick clip. And then we're going to do a little test your knowledge. And then we're going to take a little bit of a break. And then we're going to go and switch gears a little bit and go into part two, which is really focusing on skill building. And we're going to learn more about a local effort that was underway that Ebony led in Connecticut. And then we're going to go into some ABCs of lobbying. So that is the agenda. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ernest, who Kaylee introduced. He is the gun violence manager and gun violence campaign manager for Amnesty International USA, and just a super skilled organizer and campaigner. And I feel extremely fortunate to work with Ernest. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Ernest, and we're going to talk about why gun violence is a crisis in the US.
Cool. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us, taking the time out to have the conversation. I know we have the question answered later on, but please feel free, as Cynthia said, to drop any questions in the chat as we go along. I always feel that, or my goal always in conversations, is that folks should know what they need to know when they leave, and not just what I want you to know, but really what you want to know and questions you want answered. So please feel free to throw them in the chat as we go through, and let's dive into that as well. So again, I'm Ernest Coverson. I am the End Gun Violence Campaign Manager here at Amnesty International. I'm located in Chicago. I've been running our gun violence campaign now since 2019, mid 2019-ish, 2019 or so. And so we've had some good days, had some bad days in this work that we've been doing and getting it focused. As you all know, gun violence is such a multi-layered issue. And so, trying to develop what we're going to do, what angle we're going to take per se in addressing gun violence as a human rights organization. Prior to us getting involved with the gun violence work in the country, in the US, Amnesty has always been involved in gun violence work. If it's, doing international work, if it's child soldier issues, if it's international trading of firearms, we've always done gun violence work. But in 2018 was when we specifically looked at domestic gun violence issues and the challenges of gun violence in the United States itself, and not just overseas, but what was going on here in the country. And so with that, we launched our campaign, where we did some thorough research across the country, specifically here in Chicago, in New Orleans, and in the Oakland Bay area, looking at gun violence and all pieces of gun violence. Not only just, you say, quote unquote, everyday gun violence or gun violence in communities that happen across the country, but also domestic violence, suicide, and as well as mass shootings, as well as police use of force and the violence that's taken place by police using firearms. And that stream of work was handled by a colleague of ours, so we didn't dive into that as much with the gun violence campaign. But in our initial report that we produced, we did look at that. And our initial report is titled In the Line of Fire, which goes deep into each one of those areas. We talked and met with community members, elected officials, religious leaders, survivors, family members of gun violence victims, etc., the whole gambit, and talked about gun violence in these 3 city states, and developed this research to come up with what our campaign would start looking at, what our ask is of the government, both state, local, and federal, because each piece of those pieces of our government has a part to play in ending gun violence in communities across the country. And so we dived into that. And so from that, we came up with the report In the Line of Fire, and boom, we started doing work. We went to work and started, trying to make our track in this work. And before Amnesty came and got involved, the title of gun violence equaling a human rights crisis wasn't there. Individuals in the movement was not looking at gun violence as a human rights crisis. And so we helped to tag that term onto the gun violence, that gun violence in the United States is a human rights crisis that needs to be dealt with in the eye of a human rights organization, of a human rights law, as well as, it's also should be looked at as a health issue here in the country as well. And so terming it as a human rights crisis helped to bring a whole new light on it. We were able to do some international work on it, taking survivors, taking some of the activists to international conventions across the globe to bring light to the gun violence that's taking place in the country. As we've been talking about, and as Cynthia mentioned, when we started, doing the work of it being a human rights crisis and bringing the international law into it. And the U.S. has signed, either signed or ratified, a number of treaties, international treaties for human rights conventions that guarantee, the human rights impacted by gun violence. We have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. You have the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICERD, which, gun violence, that we'll talk about in a minute, affects Black and Brown communities adversely. Then you have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and many of you may have heard of CEDAW even over recently few years of it getting re-ratified and that type of thing. And so we're part of that. And then the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as we see gun violence affect young people across the country adversely. And so we have signed or ratified that as a country. And then the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that we have signed and or ratified as well. And so all of these pieces of legislation per se that United States and other countries around the globe has either signed and or ratified gives the stance of how this is a human rights crisis, because gun violence and the effect of gun violence the effects of those gun violence falls under many of those treaties that we have signed and or ratified. And so therefore, how do we then enforce that, right? How do we then bring that to light that this is a human rights crisis, and this is the framework that Amnesty has taken, and how do we get into this fight? Many times it's looked at as Amnesty International should be doing stuff, in other countries and dealing with some evil governments and all of this kind of stuff. But this issue is right here, in our country. This issue is right here taking the lives. If you look at the Declaration of Human Rights, we can't fight for any of those if individuals are not alive, right? And so the ultimate number one goal of fighting for someone's human rights is that they are alive, right? They are being a human. And so if an individual is not alive, then we can't do any of the other work that we're prescribed to do as a human rights organization or any other organization. And so we started looking at the gun violence issue in that frame. And then again, as I stated, there's so many layers to gun violence. What do we want to take on? And so initially, we joined in with all of the, many of the coalitions, and talking about, your background check issues, and all of the typical things, assault weapons ban, et cetera, in regards to gun violence. And then we found our niche, as we continue to work on it and looking at how does gun violence affect communities across the country. We looked at the Black and Brown communities and the challenges that they have in regards to gun violence. And many times, they were not at the table. When we would go to these larger conversations of gun violence in the country, those communities were not there. And so we decided, as an organization and as the campaign, that we wanted to make sure that these organizations, these communities, are getting the same funding that others are being at the table, having the conversations, because gun violence affect them differently. We see the mass shootings that take place, and many folks become educated about gun violence through mass shootings, which takes place, and become the top of the fold. It's on CNN, it's on MSNBC, it's on all the news channels for a week or two or what have you. But then it goes away. A lot of money is raised. All of that happens. But even during that time period, in communities of color across the country, there's gun violence taking place every day that never gets the news coverage that these mass shootings get. And no disrespect to the mass shootings and the victims and families of that, but there's still shootings and violence that's taking place in these communities that should still get the same attention and get the same push and elevation and care that happens with the mass shootings. And so therefore, we joined with other coalitions, other folks, and started to push out and build our campaign around those communities as well, and pushing out, how does this look? How do we deal with it? How do we deal with the federal side of it? How do we deal with the state side of it and the local governments, et cetera? And so that took us on our trip to deal with gun violence. And as I said, we've had some good wins, we had some losses as we go through. And so I want to stop there. Any thoughts, questions? And I don't want to mess up your flow, Cynthia, but I want to see if anybody had questions on that human rights framework as a human rights organization and why we got into it. Nope. Cool. Keep on rolling. So some in the chat. Is there something in the chat? Oh, that's just the link. Okay. Cool. I know, Cynthia, you had some slides. Am I supposed to go according to your slides here?
Sure. So we're going to show a video now that this is based off of some testimonies from what Ernest was referring to is in 2018, we conducted extensive research on gun violence in the United States, looking at various communities. And so we have testimonies that we want to share that shows how gun violence affects different communities in different ways. So I'm going to attempt again to share my screen and share this video, fingers crossed. So please hold on. Okay, folks can see the video?
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Good. All right. That's a good start. So let's go with it.
And I'm a domestic and gun violence survivor. Almost 6 years ago, my estranged husband stalked me to my apartment in Coral Springs, Florida. He pushed in on my apartment door, and my father and I were on the other side trying to push back and keep him out. And all of a sudden, 3 bullets came through the door.
Hi, my name is Nakia and I'm from Chicago. After going grocery shopping with my daughter, my son, and my sister, I pulled up into the parking lot of my then job, tailoring cleaning. Put the car in park and went to turn around and tell my daughter to scoot over so my son could sit back there with her. And before I can get it out of my mouth, gunshots erupted.
I grew up in the Austin area in Chicago. Austin is probably, well, not probably, but numerically, it's the most violent neighborhood in Chicago. I think I became aware of my first homicide, I want to say 9 years old, walking to the mailbox. Back in the day, people used to have the big boom boxes, and a guy was getting robbed for his boom box, and he didn't want to give it up, and the guy shot him in the head.
And my father was shot twice, and I was shot twice in front of my 4-year-old son, my son I had with my estranged husband.
And the last shot shattered the back window. And in the back is where Takaya sat. Now everybody else is getting up, but Takaya's not moving. So I'm calling her name and she's not responding. I call her again, she's not responding. I'm like, Takaya, stop playing with me. Get up. She doesn't respond. So I get up out the van and run to the other side of the van, open the door. And she was just laying there. She had been shot.
In my mind, my mama gave me some mail to put in the mailbox. I stepped around them, put the mail in the mailbox, came back home. My mom asked me, was I all right? I said, yeah, I'm good. She gave me maybe 50 cents, or back then that was a lot of money. Bought me some candy, that was my therapy.
So, and that's just 3 stories, of individuals we met with that have been affected, and many of you, may have yourself and or family members that have been affected by gun violence, in some form or fashion. Some folks unfortunately lose their lives or lose loved ones to gun violence. Some, as Dr. Chico Tillman, just saw it as a young child, and it's probably changed the way he looked at death, looked at guns, etc., deciding if he needed to carry a gun himself. And so gun violence affects individuals, in various ways. We did our first report titled In the Line of Fire. Subsequently, after that, we did some additional reports. One is called, I knew I was going to lose it. As soon as I get ready to say it, I always do this. We did a report on survivors and the challenges that survivors of gun violence have in regards to getting funding from states, crime victim funds, which I believe all states have a crime victims fund, or many of the states have a crimes victim fund, which is not just for individuals that get affected by gun violence, but for any crime, but to have to navigate that process after that traumatic experience to help cover the cost of hospital, to help cover the cost of losing employment, etc. And so the challenges that many folks have to deal with that was our second report. And then our third report is around domestic violence and the work that domestic violence organizations are doing across the country, and the challenges that individuals have when they get, say, restraining orders, et cetera, on spouses, individuals, and then the challenge they have with police force, enforcing those restraining orders. Individuals still are able to have their firearm even though they have threatened the lives of their husband or threatened the lives of their wives or partner, but still are able to carry that firearm and have access to those firearms and those challenges. And so gun violence, as I stated a couple of times, there's so many layers to the gun violence work, and we consistently try to push that out. And just further on how is it a gun violence a human rights crisis? You're looking at, since say roughly 2016, when we started our research, even up till today, you have an average roughly of say 40,000. Some years a little less, some years a little more, but roughly 40,000 individuals are shot and killed every year by gun violence. And even during the pandemic, the numbers skyrocket. We've had 2 years of record-breaking violence in the country, as well as record-breaking numbers of firearms being purchased during the pandemic, during the COVID life. Many states that we were fighting and pushing back, California, some of the southern states, when states was closing down and only essential places were to be open, many states declared gun shops as essential. And so they were allowed to stay open during COVID. And so you got a hospital, you got the grocery store, you got the pharmaceutical spot, the Walgreens, the CVS's, and you got Johnny Joe's gun shop is open for business, like nothing is going on. So the country's gun crave is very interesting and very challenging on that. And let me say this as well. Amnesty is not against the Second Amendment. We are not saying that folks cannot have a gun, that we need to take all the guns, throw them in the ocean or whatever. We're not saying none of that. We are just saying that if there are going to be guns unavailable, that there should be some common sense gun laws that governs individuals that are purchasing and owning gun laws. You look at roughly, I think it's increased now, but I think 30 states or so allow for open carry of a gun in public without a license or permit. So that's an individual can purchase a gun, no training, no anything, put in his pocket or her pocket, and just walk down the street with a gun. And no one knows, not even the law enforcement has to know that they have a gun. Kansas, I believe Ohio, Florida or Georgia, and some other states over the past 3-4 years or so have also passed legislation to allow campus carry. So students are allowed to carry guns on campuses. And now just think, you mix an 18, 19-year-old with liquor and a firearm. It's a pot of mess. And luckily we haven't had, the shooting that's come to that from that. But why put that out there to allow that situation to take place? So not only we did look at federal stuff, a lot of our states are doing some ridiculous and allowing for some ridiculous laws. I think, was it last year after, or this year after Uvalde shooting, we had sheriffs in, I believe it was in North Carolina, their way was to give teachers, every teacher be able to, no, not that. They was going to allow the resource officers to have AR-15s in the schools. It was the sheriff in North Carolina that wanted to do that. And so as we look at the federal government, and we're going to go dive into that now, we also have to look at our state and local leadership and what they are allowing and want to do, from the county sheriffs, from our state governors, that type of thing, and what they're also allowing to take place there in your own community when it comes to gun laws, when it comes to who can have a firearm, all of those, like I'm saying, open carry, that's state by state. So those are laws that are developed by your state legislator, your state governor, to allow guns in schools. resource officers, that's city, that's a school board, that's allowing those situations. And so we have to, we have to attack this on every level of dealing with that. And and before I go further, just popped in my mind again, we want to send respect out to the 3 young men that lost their lives last night at University of Virginia. It was 3 young men that were shot and killed by, I think he was still a student or maybe a former student, at the University of Virginia. 3 players on the football team. Last I looked, we don't know the whole why and what, but 3 college students have lost their lives. And I think another 2 was injured by gun violence on a college campus just last night. And so we have to look at that, continue to look at that. And so we have, like I say, we got into and started looking at, gun violence on community basis, Black and brown individuals, Black men, especially from 15 to 24, gun violence is the leading cause of death for Black men and boys from 15 to 24 across the country. It's the second leading cause of Latino men and boys as well in that same age range in this country. And so how do we deal with that? How do we address that? And there are many programs that are currently doing that on the ground. We call those community CVIs, community violence intervention programs. And these programs are ran by individuals, maybe former shooters, individuals that, want to change their life, change the community, have lived in these communities for years. And so they have been doing this work on the ground, but without the adequate funding, without the adequate support to do the work that they have, which is data proven. We're in this society now that everything needs to be tracked. We got to know that 1 + 1 is 2 all the time. And so these are data proven programs that shows the changes in gun violence, changes in the community across the board. And so many of them have been functioning, they get funding from a state, or they may get funding from their local city, but according who's in the seat is according to if they're going to get the money. We just had elections a week ago now? I say 2 days ago. That was a week ago, right? So we had an election a week ago. We got some changes in governors. So, if funding is coming through the government, through the state government, and now a new governor is in and he or she wants to, cut the budget, these type of programs are the ones that's immediately on the chopping block. And so we and other partners looked at, we should look at the federal government to provide this funding so it can last longer. It could be a higher dollar amount and it could last longer. Because you also look at the data. You look at like 27, I think it's 27 cities that has 127 cities, 127 cities across the country are the cities that have the leading amount of gun violence in the country, where you have the most murders. So it's not this broad ban. We got to hit every little small town and everything across it. If you attack, just as it did with COVID, if you attack the source, you know where it's happening. If you dive deep into that, provide the funding, and provide programs that can change these individual lives, you can look at curbing the gun violence. So you're only looking at 127 cities if you really want to dive into it. And so we start pushing with the support of Senator Cory Booker and Congressman Stephen Horsford. They drafted a piece of legislation titled Break the Cycle of Violence Act that will provide funding for community-based organizations doing this gun violence prevention work. $5 billion over 8 years. And so with that, we created this project called the Heroes Project, as you see on my background, Everyday Heroes. So these are individuals that we highlighted as 7 individuals out of 6 cities that we talked to, worked with, gained their trust, that we were able to tell their stories on their own personal lives, the work that they do, the organizations that they work with, and their images, that we were able to utilize their face and mock them up as a hero, as you saw a little bit on the video, but most definitely you can go to heroes.amnestyusa.org and see them in full hero look. And and we utilize them to tell the story. Because they're the one, one of the young ladies, Miss Miriam out of Cleveland, she works in hospital prevention. So there's a shooting, she goes directly to the hospital to help de-escalate the situation, help the family work through the issues at the hospital and get that process taken care of, but also to make sure that the family don't feel like, family or friends feel like they got to go out and retaliate, or individuals on the street come in and try to finish the job if they haven't, that kind of thing. And so she's on the front line. And during COVID, she didn't take time off. Not only was she doing that work, she was also doing COVID stuff and telling people what PPE even was, where can you find it, where can you get a COVID shot, etc. And so not only her, all of our heroes and others that do this work on the ground ended up being that, not only doing what they do on a day-to-day basis, but then also, this COVID and putting themselves on the line. Folks was getting infected day to day. We didn't know what was going on. And so, but they were still out in communities addressing the gun violence, and working with that. So our Heroes Project elevates them, pushing this $5 billion ask. The President Biden, after conversation with his staff and working and Senator Booker and others, they bought into it. President Biden decided he wanted to get this passed. He spoke about it earlier this year in one of his speeches in March or April of this year, that this needs to pass, this break the cycle. We need to provide this money. And that gave us the momentum to do this. And so we, started doing work, and Ebony will talk about some of that grassroots work on the state level, but it was also what we did federally as well with our membership, pushing for these dollars. And also includes $1.5 billion for job readiness programs as well for young people. And so we were able to get it passed through the House of Representatives. And so we're now trying to get it passed through the Senate. We do see, and amnesty is nonpartisan. We don't go for Republicans, we don't go for Democrats, but we do see that we have a possible friendlier Senate that's going to be in next year, but we need to get it finished before the end of this year, because if we don't, we have a possibly not so friendly House that's going to be coming in January. So if we don't get it passed out the Senate, we got to start all over. And so that's getting it passed in the House and in the Senate. And now this time we have a friendly and non-friendly side. So we want to push and try to get that done, before the end of this year as well. But not only that, gun violence, in communities of color is multi-layered. So it's not just providing this, but as even in the bill, there's job readiness programs. We have to look at the environmental justice challenges that's in communities. We heard about the water issues in Jackson, Mississippi, in Flint, and other places. We hear about the education or the lack thereof, quality education in communities. So in these communities where our brown and Black brothers and sisters live, there's layers to all of this. And so we're just addressing one piece of it, but holistically, we have to work with and work across organizations to deal with all of these issues that, that comes out finally as gun violence. So individuals just don't go pick up, I want to go shoot somebody. It's all of these other pieces that comes together that be the symptoms of the final product, which is the violence that comes out of the nozzle of a gun. And so as we deal with the gun violence, we also have to deal with some of the other symptoms that leads to it as well as we address this issue. And so lastly, I want to say, that we do, we are address and support other issues, like I say, the background checks, the assault weapons ban, has been talked about, especially since, this year with Uvalde and Highland Park here in Illinois, and in upstate New York. We saw this year alone, and even the shooting Sunday, and so many pieces of it. So with mass shootings, the federal government or the FBI's definition of a mass shooting is 3 or more individuals that are shot in one situation. shot or killed in one situation. So anytime you have 3 or more individuals shot, that's actually a mass shooting according to the federal definition. Again, we don't get the names, we don't get the media, but it's a mass shooting. So last night with these three young men were shot, well, actually it was 5, was shot. That was a mass shooting. It didn't happen with AR-15, I don't believe. So it doesn't get the same, quote unquote fanfare, but it still was a mass shooting. And so with that mass shooting, that's roughly I believe the number is 589 or 598 mass shootings in the country this year. And we still got another 30 plus days to go before the year is over. And so we may see some other incidents like that happen, unfortunately. And so the assault weapons ban, we are in support of banning assault weapons. And so that is the only gun that we say we are we don't think people should have in regards to gun regulation or the Second Amendment, because assault weapons was not made for civilians. It was created as a war weapon. The bullet in a AR-15 style weapon is made to destroy internally. It doesn't go in and come straight out. Once it hits anything, it will divert to another part of the body. So individual can get shot in the shoulder, but the bullet could end up coming out of their kidney because it's to hit a bone and moved around 2 or 3 times and now tore up the whole inside of the body. And so they were made for war. They were made specifically to kill and destroy. And so individuals shouldn't have that. So that is the only one we do say folks should not have. Right now is one we're saying that folks should not have. So we are for the assault weapons ban. We are for universal background checks. We are for Ethan's law, which require individuals that have firearms to safely store those firearms from young people in the house, from individuals that should not have access to guns, if it's a mental challenge or whatever the issue is. So that's a federal piece of legislation that we are also in support of and pushing, that the Congress right now, all of those 3, break the cycle, assault weapons ban, and Ethan's law, all have passed the House of Representatives. They are all now sitting on the Senate side and can become law instantly if the Senate would vote for them. But we have not had the political will of our US government to do what they need to do. And so those 3 pieces of legislation wouldn't solve everything, but I would bet to believe it would help bring down some of the gun violence that's taking place in this country, if those 3 pieces of legislation are passed in the Congress as well this year. And so I'll stop there. I know I've been talking for a minute, so I don't know if it's some questions or thoughts, or you want me to keep going, or what we're doing.
Let's open it up for questions. And we have one in the chat, and I encourage folks to take yourself off mute and feel free to ask Ernest any follow-up questions before we proceed. And the one in the chat, Ernest, is what is the number in comparison to last year in terms of gun mass shootings, I believe, or in comparison to our national average?
That's a good question. I don't know. Let me see if I can pull that real quick. I don't know what last year's total number was in regards to mass shootings. I need to find out.
And any other questions? And again, just feel free to come off mute.
I have a question for folks. They don't ask me, I ask y'all. Do folks not think that gun violence is an issue in the country?
I was just going to bring that up, but not that I think that it is a huge issue. But how would you recommend advocating in an educational system? Like I go to school in Kentucky and I'm a criminal justice major and social work. And in one of my classes, one of my teachers is very pro-gun, including assault weapons. And I think that it's very insensitive the way that he talks about mass shootings and gun issues. But how would you advocate for those victims or people who have been involved in those kinds of that type of violence?
Um, Good question. I mean, and that is an interesting thing. I mean, gun violence wasn't as we had the issue, but it wasn't as say prevalent or in the face as it was like it is now. When I was in school, so it would be interesting to have that conversation with professors now, like that, like really love guns and will come to class with a gun and all kind of foolishness. So that would be interesting. But I mean, how to advocate or work with. I mean, one is the simple support, finding out what they want to do, or how can you support them directly. Many times our agenda is not the same as what they as survivors or family members want. And so we most definitely need to see what they want to do and how to do it. Secondly, I think it is the point of the two things. One, legislatively, we can and getting the like-minded individuals, and I think Ebony will talk about as well, like also connecting the dots of other issues and challenges in communities and build it up that it's not just, oh, this group of folks, oh, y'all just hate guns. No, but it's, the environmental group of individuals, we're dealing with, the lack of water in the community that's also dealing with gun violence. Also the women's groups that's dealing with domestic violence. So now we at, 50 people versus your crew of 5 people that y'all hang out with, that they just know y'all are the gun violence lady on campus. So they're going to, dismiss you. But now you're bringing in all of these other individuals and coming from different walks of life. Now you're building a bigger coalition that can get addressed, and they can't just dismiss you at that point, as well. So I think those two ways, supporting the families the way they can, way they want to be supported and move at their pace. But then also, how do you build out your coalition per se to more than just the individuals that don't like guns, but how does it intersect with other pieces as well?
Ernest, I think this is Debbie here. I think you're real creative at navigating amnesty and what amnesty is about with, how this is how you've made this, it's a domestic issue and how you've made this and worked with this over the years. My own personal opinion, and this is not amnesties, is that it's kind of blowback from all of our militarism. And, we controlling the world and, the whole, just what's happening with our whole military industrial complex. I think it's blowback from that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's another layer of this whole gun violence piece is the militaristic of it, how much we just as a society rely on guns and do our gun thing, to even the fact that now you have the federal, and always have, but have the federal government even selling surplus or outdated or old, if they're getting new militaristic weapons and vehicles, they're now selling that to local police departments. Before they was giving them away, which was even worse. They just let them have it. Now they are at least charging them for it. I don't know what they're charging, but they are going to start charging for it. But yeah, so now you even have a police force with these, tanks riding down the street and all of this kind of stuff. So it is this society of military. Yeah, you're right. I totally agree.
I mean, I saw the question about that Abby posed about root causes of gun violence. And so my mom said something to me one time that I think makes a lot of sense. So and I'll kind of talk about this in my piece, but one of the things is community violence, especially community violence per se, predominantly affects Black and brown communities. And my mother used to always say, if you take away a man's propensity for violence, right, then it diminishes the need, right? So a lot of times, right, people are doing things out of lack of, right? So my mom as a mother used to always say growing up, like, I don't care if I gotta lie, steal, cheat, do whatever. Like, if I gotta take care of my kids and I don't got it, that might be my option, right? And so I think a lot of the times we look at the root causes of people just being bad people, when in fact some of it, especially in urban areas, right, a lot of it comes out of like this need for like respect, which historically is not being given to Black and brown communities. It comes out of stuff like the need to have, which some people just don't have, and so I got to go get it, because if I don't have it and I got to give it to my kids, like, I'm gonna go figure out how to get it. Like, and so a lot of times we associate it with this idea of bad, when there are moments when it's just really, it comes out of the lack of, right, the lack of resources, the lack of opportunity, the lack of like community, the lack of like lack of having. So I just think like, and policing can sometimes be a part of it, but a lot of it just too is just historically like how the government and how other things have kind of worked, to offset and get rid of like the surplus, and introducing things into the community that just didn't come out of anywhere, and that people in the community just didn't have access to. Like, it had to come from somewhere, right? Like, it's no way you're telling me people have like Uzis in the middle of the hood. Like, where are you finding Uzis in the middle of the hood? Like, I don't understand where we do that at, right? Like, we're like, you know what I mean? Like, in certain communities, where are these things coming from? And so just looking at it from that perspective. But I don't know what Ernest thinks about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, we have to yeah, we can't do a blanket piece, a blanket reason for everything, for the gun violence, and then understand individuals' particular circumstance that led them to the gun violence. I'm not saying it's right, but again, as I stated earlier, there are many layers to why individuals leads to the gun violence, and the challenge, what happens at the end of that nozzle, that have gotten in. Until we start dealing with some of that, we won't be able to get this end of gun violence that we're looking for. But jumping back into the chat as well, do you think the issue of gun violence in the U.S. has become too politicized for folks to see it as primarily as a human rights issue and not one of attacking the Second Amendment? If so, how would you go about reversing that mentality? Ooh, that's a loaded question. But yeah, it is. I think it has become too politicized. Because if you look at, just common sense, just the common sense side of it, just say, you need an AR-15, or that individuals are coming for your guns, and you get, that Second Amendment group that, just want a gun for so it's politicized. It just, you just can't. I find myself trying to wonder, how can I wrap my mind around how they think, and wonder if I could ever get into a room with someone that will just put the politics aside and just have some real conversation about a gun. Because if you are okay with having to jump through hoops to get your dog registered and pay $100 or whatever it is to your city to get your dog registered every year, and you have a little Chihuahua, no disrespect to the Chihuahuas, but you got a Chihuahua that's not gonna hurt anybody. I mean, the dog it won't even hurt, the enemy coming in your house. The dog ain't gonna do nothing. So, but you okay with doing that? But for me to just say, just register your gun. We're not even asking, no, just register your gun. And they lose their mind about asking them to register the gun. And so it has become too politicized. And how do we go about reversing that? I mean, I don't know. That's the great question. I don't know if we're too far gone to reverse it. Can we bring it back to get folks, unfortunately, like this year, we were able to move and get some legislation passed, the first time to get legislation passed in 30 years at the federal government level. But it took, unfortunately, individuals to lose their lives, and especially the young people in Uvalde. And then we were able to get the Congress to do some bipartisan work. And so I think it will take those moments right now to get that movement, when there are situations where it's just a very huge atrocity in the shooting, that we're able to get folks to be in touch with their human side and put the politics aside to really get something done that way, but continuing to tell the story, continuously to put a face in as a shooting and not just a number is another way that we're going to hopefully get that mentality changed around in our Congress and even our state legislatures as well. How optimistic with reference to your findings are you that the proper policies against gun violence will start taking action? I'm optimistic about it, because the thing is, we have previously, even the federal government has not provided funding for data research. We research how many butterflies is in, neighborhoods. We research, everything, but we have not allocated dollars to gun violence research in this country. And so now, with a lot of the funding that has been approved over the past year or so, there has been dollars now allocated for research. And so with that, we can start showing that these policies that are passing, that these dollars that are getting allocated really have had or can and are having an impact in communities across the country. And so I think we'll be able to see these policies that are being enacted and then have that data behind it to back it up. We know, and if people in the community can see and know, but we don't have it on paper. And so until we have it on paper by some official, university of whoever says that this is it, then, folks will agree that these, 4 programs in this neighborhood has helped to curb the gun violence. So I think we're on the right path. It's just been taken, as I said, 30 years to get to this point as well. How do you think factors like perceptions of identity or class inequality that may at first glance seem unrelated affect recent upticks in gun violence? How do you think factors like perceptions? Nikhil, are you still on? Yes. Can you come off of mute and give me a little more detail in that question? Are you in a spot to do that?
Yeah, so I just meant that I think a lot of people on the group already mentioned about how when there's a sense of like wounded identity, or when there's a perceived like impact in that way, it can fuel gun violence. So I just wanted more like explanation about that. So yeah.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, I think that and if I don't answer, just tag me as well. But I mean, I think that, certain communities, certain individuals are people, think that they're prone to gun violence, or it's going to happen in that community, or it's okay to happen, in that community. It's something that's going to happen. Whereas I think, I think that, there are situations and challenges in those communities. I mean, we have to look at, gun violence in different mass shootings is one situation. Gun violence in, the shooting that takes place in Black and brown communities is a different thing. You have the racism side in that, as you said, of course, you got the classism piece in that as well, and the resources that's in certain communities. And again, like you've here in Highland Park, Hearts went up there, met with some folks as well. But like instantly they had, it's an affluent community. And so they was instantly able to put money together. Like in the next week or so, they was flying out to DC to lobby their legislators and everything. But that same shooting, a shooting that takes place in Southside Chicago, none of that's going to happen. We're not going to be able to fly everybody out to DC and start lobbying the Congress about, this shooting and that kind of thing that takes place. So all of those factors in that, affects the gun violence, and it affects, I think, with the community, with the country the way it is now. And, you have so many, so much anger, right? That's going on in the country, and people are, I just saw in the news before I started. There's a woman was fighting on an airplane. I was flying from here from San Francisco to Chicago, and she had a baby in her arm, was fighting with the stewardess, talking about I'm gonna kill you and all of this kind of stuff. And so from all the anger and that kind of thing as well, you know, the inflation, all of that I think is will have that effect of an uptick in the gun violence, you know, across the country as well. Holiday time is coming, you know, folks are not, you know, they're sad, they can't provide whatever. All of that helps to build, unfortunately, helps to build into to it as well. So Kaylee, I have some good advice a while back that reversing mentality often starts with our efforts being focused on minds that can be molded. True. There are individuals that no matter what we say may never change their mind, but they are many to mind. Yeah, that is where we should focus the majority of our advocacy. So true. I'm at the point to live long enough that, you know, I don't fight with grown people too much. You know, I don't fight with grown people too much. I ain't trying to change no 60-year-old, you know, mind that's been stuck that way. It's a waste of my time. So I work with the ones I can, but you're right. Getting young people, getting the ones that, you know, you feel that can mold, want to change, want to have a different thought. Working with them most definitely is at least for me. Now there's some that love to go and fight with, you know, some good grown old people, but I'm me personally, and I don't want to fight with old people. They're not, they ain't gonna kill me. You know what I'm saying? I'll have a heart attack and all this guy got high blood pressure, and then they still going on about their business. I'm not doing that. No. Cool. I think I'm trying to get this number for you as well. 690 was the 2021 number, Kaylee, on the mass shootings. 690. So we're about 100. We run about 100 less right now, from where we were from 2021's final number. So we still got 40 days or so before the year's over, 50 days for the year's over. So hopefully we won't meet it. But yeah, they was at 690 last year.
Well, thank you, Ernest, and thank you everyone for your questions and your participation in the chat. There's going to be more to come. I'm going to move us along a little bit. And so the next, I'm going to try my third look at tech tonight. I have a Kahoots quiz. I'm going to share my screen, and the idea is that we're going to sort of test some of the knowledge that we just learned and Ernest had shared with us, and Ebony. So let me share my screen. You're going to see the Kahoots. The idea is if you could use your smartphone or what have you, log into the Kahoots so you can log in as a player, and we'll go through this. And this will probably take about 5 to 6 minutes. But again, this is just to sort of test your knowledge. And here we go. Folks, can you see that? Who doesn't like a Kahoots? So feel free to join. Do a little wake up.
Hey, Cynthia, maybe it's me. But like you got your screen shared. Oh, am I wrong? I don't know how to get in. How do we get in?
Use your smartphone and do the QR code and then put the pin in, and you're going to play on your phone. I'm just sharing my screen as like the main stage, the podium.
You're assuming people have a smartphone. I don't even have a cell phone.
Well, there is a link there. If you're on the computer, there's a link, it says join. I could put it in the chat, and then I'll put the, I will put it.
It says Jalen and Salma.
Yeah, we have 2 people in right now.
Okay, that's the, I don't see the join, Christie's in. I don't see the join anymore.
If you go to.
It's okay, I don't.
Right.
Okay, well, I'll look at the chat again, but I don't, you know.
I shouldn't assume that. I'm so sorry. But you
Yeah,
can still play along with us.
okay.
Okay, I'll give folks another minute.
It's so, I don't, if you didn't assume, that's okay, but I just letting you know we can't all do it, so.
Absolutely. No, that is so true. All right, I'm going to start to move us along. Okay, here we go. This is testing our knowledge. It's true or false? Human rights are freedoms and protections belonging to everyone and are based on principles of dignity, equality, and respect. All right, that is true. Get some folks. There you go. A little competition happening. Second question. Now this is multiple choice and you can have more than one answer. So the Break the Cycle of Violence Act will can folks read the options? Okay. All right, this was a little bit of a trick answer. So it will do all. It will establish community gun violence as a public health issue, provides federal grants to communities for gun violence prevention programs, reduces urban gun violence in American cities, and provides services for victims for violent crimes. That is Break the Cycle of Violence Act, and we need to pass it in the Senate this year. So we have an action at the end of the workshop tonight. All right, Jalen is in the lead. Here we go. Next one. This is true or false? More people own guns in the United States than in any other industrialized country in the world. Great. We have a lot of smart people on this. All right, Jalen, you're still leading the way here. You must have some cahoots experience.
Right. This is Jalen. What? Take it over.
All right. We have this is a multi-select. Gun violence in the United States is denying people their civil and political rights, including their rights to That was a little bit of a tough one, but we got it. So it denies the right to, according to Amnesty's research and the way we framed human rights, it denies the right to live, right to security of person, and right to be free from discrimination and equal protection. Next question. Let's see. Jalen's still in the lead. We got a strong contender here. Number 5, multi-select again. Gun violence also undermines the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to education and right to health. Gun violence undermines these two economic, social, cultural rights. All right, Selma is picking up in the lead too. So we have some close competition here. Next question, just a few more. With regards to gun violence, the U.S. is in violation of these two human rights treaties. Great. Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICERD, as well as the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or also known as the ICCPR. These are two international human rights treaties that the United States has signed that we are in violation of with regards to how we approach gun, how we allow, permit, and deal with gun violence in the United States. Let's see. Oh, we got some stiff competition here. Jen just took over the lead. So a couple more questions, and then we're going to break into a new part 2 of this session. This is a little bit of a trick question because we didn't talk too much about the NRA. But in 1871, the NRA was established to ensure that every individual has the right to carry a gun. Is that true or false? Let's see where we are. This is actually false, and I'll share why. The NRA, in Ernest and Ebony, please jump in. The NRA was actually established as a sort of sportsmanship to increase like American marksmen, and forget the gender term there, but marksmanship in terms of ability to shoot. And so it wasn't about ensuring everyone had the right to own a gun. And it actually was about holding sort of tournaments for marksmanship. And then it got federal funding, and it's turned into what we know as today. So that is the NRA. Ernest, anything more you would say to that?
No, you're right. No, you're right. It was not. Yeah, it got politicized in about the 60s, I think it was. It became very political and found they was able to influence the government that way.
So let's see where we are. Okay, Jen is still in the leads, and Jalen is a strong second, and Selma third. The Brady Act mandates and requires a national background check for every firearm purchased in the United States. True or false? It is true. Jen is in this lead again, coming up from behind. Okay, 9. State and local governments may not enact firearm laws and regulations. Is that true or false? That is false. Great. All right, Jen is still in the lead. Now, this is the last question, everyone, so get ready. What is the root cause of urban violence? I'm sorry, this should read urban gun violence. Six, great, that is it. Government failure to address institutional racism results in racial disparities. So let's see where we are. I want to thank you all for participating in this little test your knowledge. And there we go. Let's see. Jen, congratulations. All right, everyone. Thank you for playing along with us on that one. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we were going to build in a 5-minute break, but we're not going to because we're going to end at 9, approximately 9 on the dot. So I want to take a minute. Feel free if you need to just stretch or do anything just to sort of switch gears, because we're going to go into a second part here, really focus on advocacy. And this is a lot of information that Ernest shared. It's troubling information. It's also information that really we can't just sit on. We have to act on. So I'm going to hand it over to an esteemed colleague, Ebony, who I had the wonderful fortune to work with when Ebony was an undergrad, a student activist in Amnesty. And Ebony is now the legislative coordinator for the state of Connecticut, which means that Ebony has their finger on the pulse of what's happening with legislative and human rights issues in the state of Connecticut, works very closely with our government relations and our grassroots leadership groups to engage people in legislative action. And so we had some successes in Connecticut, and I really want to hand it over to our expert to talk about this and who really led the way on what took place. So Ebony, I'm going to share.
All righty. My name's Ebony McLeese. And so what is really weird, so let's go this way. Amnesty did a switch, and I am considered one of the pilot states for state work right now. Going out of this year and piloting what would state work look like for Amnesty, right? And so gun violence was the campaign that I focused on. It started last year when I was still pregnant. So I was pregnant starting this work last March of 2021. And then I had my babies in August of 2021. And so I do not condone this at all, because you probably are going to look at me like I'm crazy. So prior to having my kids, we had set up a press conference at the state capitol in Hartford. That happened on September 13th. So I had my babies August 5th. I had them via cesarean. I showed up at the Capitol on September 13th with my kids in the car, and my sister drove me because I wasn't cleared to drive. And I remember I got out of the car, and the guy that ran the organization was like, "Why is she limping?" And the lady I worked with, Tara, was like, "She just had a C-section, and I don't understand how she's out of bed." So I wouldn't condone that, but I did. And so that was the start and the launch of state work for me. When it came to gun violence. And so pushing forward, right, we were able to get, at least on our state level, a lot of wins. There was a student-led gun violence conference that just happened October 9th, where 500 youth in the state of Connecticut came together and had a conference about what they could do and what advocacy looks like for them as student leaders from all across the state, and primarily from our bigger areas, our urban areas, our urban centers. And we had that at the Capitol, so that was a gain. Connecticut was able to also pass our own legislation to start research and to possibly start funding. Sorry, my babies are having their moment right now. To start funding for the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the state of Connecticut. So that is something that is on the table and is in its research phases about how that we can do that. And then another thing that I was able to really work closely with was we had we called it a town talk. In several towns throughout the state, we did rally work. One of the things that I am most proud of is my city, New Haven, Connecticut, was actually able to launch its own Office of Violence Prevention, where the focus is gun work. So in my city, there is an Office of Violence Prevention that focuses on gun violence. And so it sounds weird, right? New Haven houses Yale University. But we also have our own set of violence issues in this city, and so this issue for me is really important because it hits home. The Buffalo massacre that happened at TAAS. I went to Canisius College in Buffalo. I used to shop at TAAS. My friends still live in Buffalo. And so that was one that hit close to home, considering Main Street used to be my home. A couple of weeks ago, well, over the last couple of weeks, my dad has lost 3 separate students that he coached to gun violence, one including that got shot in the middle of the afternoon at 3 o'clock when kids were getting off the school bus. Like, and so the reality of the situation is like, this is, at least for me, a issue that hits close to home. And one I know for my mom, and especially being a mom now of Black and brown children, is one that's really hard, right? No parent. I remember there was a shooting down the street from my house where a 16-year-old that we knew really well was actually shot in the car, sitting in the car at 12 o'clock at night. He was with friends. And I remember hearing the gunshots because it's completely close to my house, like literally a block away. And I remember my mom's reaction was she got up and went to the door to see if my brother's sneakers were at the door, right? Was my brother home? Like, right? Like that's the initial reaction that you're having. And so this is one that I know very well that I just feel like we just need to have a better conversation about. And so moving forward, I have been doing a lot of legislative work, and I actually am focused. Hold on. All right, my kids are doing all types of crazy stuff right now. All right, sit down. So yeah. With that being said, right? So I am here to share some skills that you can use, right? Primarily. So Miss Cynthia, you can actually go to my slide. One of the things that we do as legislative coordinators here for Amnesty International, and for the most part, most states have them. One of the things that we do is we actually work through what the legislative process looks like, right? So for everything, right, the legislative process starts with scheduling a meeting, you prepare for your visit, you have the meeting, and you have the follow-up. If you hit the next one. So when you schedule a meeting, right? So for everything, and as we move forward, if you want to participate, this is something that you can reach out to. Mostly all states have LCs, and so I can drop the grassroots information in the chat that you can email, and they'll tell you who your legislative coordinator is. But we start with targets and locations, right? We have contact information. So you call, you fax, or you email to set up your meeting as quick as possible. And for most people, we tell them to introduce yourself as an AIUSA activist, a member of whatever state, and a constituent, right? So like this part is really important, that you outline that you're a constituent for a particular area, right? Because people want to hear from their constituents because you're the people that vote for them. And so you schedule your meetings. If you look right here where it says find out your LC, if you email grassroots@aiusa.org, they will actually tell you who the LC is for your state. And if there is one in that area, and if there is something, if you want to participate in lobbying, and that will be coming up soon, that's an opportunity for you to get involved in this process and not necessarily feel intimidated. Oh yeah, and legislative and state-based coordinators. Sorry, so used to amnesty jargon, it's a horrible thing. And so when it comes to state work, right? One of the things I really want to point out about state work when you're doing lobbying is you want to make sure that you know how your state legislation works. So the states are nothing like the federal government, right? Some people have so for Connecticut, we have like a 3-month session. So like I deliberately remember when I was lobbying, I had from February to like April, and that was the whole lobby session, and that was as much as I had. That was all that I had. And so literally a lot of the work I had to do was behind the scenes, right? I had to make those connections with people when I didn't necessarily know what was in session, to see what was on the table and making those personal connections. So you just want to make sure that you know your state lobby work, your state sessions and what those look like, because that's the difference from the state and the federal level. Next slide, Ms. Cynthia. All right, so when you prepare for your meeting, right? what you want to do is, if you're ever preparing for an amnesty related meeting, amnesty is really good from the governmental relations team about providing your background information, right? They give you the backgrounder that you will use that has the information, that has the asks, that have the breakdown of what's going on. You want to anticipate security and travel issues. So a lot of areas are very high on security. So you want to make sure that if you are going, you arrive early, because people will be asking for certain identifying information. Delegations. So we tell people to create a delegation. So to create a group of people, so that means you would have a leader, a presenter. A storyteller is a person that has a personal connection, if you can make one. Note takers, those are individuals that kind of write down what your follow-ups are. So if the person asks for more information, so they may ask like for something that Ernest may have, such as a report, you would then write that down so that Ernest can give you that. And then the last part of it, right, is you want to make sure that you role play, right? So you want to practice those asks, and you want to practice those talking points and answering likely questions based on what's given to you. One of the things you can't prepare for, so I never forget, I actually was working with a new LC from Texas. And this is the funniest experience I had personally. The LC I had from Texas, we had to go to, whose office was it? Cruz. We had to go to Senator Cruz's office. And the thing about Senator Cruz's office was Senator Cruz was, the thing about Senator Cruz was when he was actually on, when we actually went into the office, we were sitting in there and he was on the phone, and his person picked up the phone and said, "To the best of my knowledge, Senator Cruz has never threatened anybody with physical harm." And I was like, whoa, what am I walking into right now? Right? And I looked at the girl and I was like, we're going to talk about immigration, right? And I'm a person of color, and you're like not American, and like, is this gonna work out for us? Like, right? So like, it was so uncomfortable, but you hear things that you're like, you can't be serious. So just making sure like that you do role play, because you'll have those weird instances, although they don't happen often. Next slide. Making that noise. So there are ABCs of lobbying, right? So the one thing we always say when we lobby at Amnesty is we always want to be accurate. So that's the A. Please don't make stuff up. There's been people that make things up and it doesn't help. So right, if you don't know, just say you don't know. Or try to be as accurate as you can with what you have. Be brief, get to the point, hit it, it's there, and make sure that you're clear about what you are asking them to do. Be courteous. So do your best to be kind. One thing that we always say, especially at the federal level, is the people in the federal level, they all tend to work at different offices at some time, and they are really the gatekeepers of the information. So for us, especially as legislative coordinators, it's really important that we build those relationships, or even as constituents, because those are the people that can actually give us good information that we can take back about things that are happening and things that are going on. And lastly, the D is to develop a relationship. And so you want to make sure that you develop a strong relationship leaving that office, right? Make sure that you do the follow-up. Make sure that you say the thank you. If you can and you have a digital platform, take a picture and post it. If there's things that they have done that are good, highlight those, right? Like these are all things that people appreciate and will keep that relationship for you going. Next slide. So of course, it's very simple. Be on time, dress to make a good impression, coordinate your arrival with everybody, always have your introduction of yourself, and thank the person for meeting with you. Like, that's really important. And if there's something that you know, so Amnesty is good about providing information about what they have supported. So you want to make sure that you always say thank you for what they have done, and you can contact your legislative coordinator so that they can tell you this information. Next slide. The ask, right? So you would make your ask. So one thing about the ask is you have it on the top of the briefing information. It's 1 to 2 sentences, and always make sure that you're referencing the bill. So at the federal level, the bill is always going to start with HR, which is House resolution, or it's going to start with the Senate information. So it'll always say, so if you see the H or the S, you know where you're going and you know who you're asking. We also lobby on non-bill issues. So one of the things that does exist is this program with the Congress that's called the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And so these are people that would take up particular individuals or particular causes as individual senators or individual congresspeople that have nothing to do with the particular bill. They would just do it because they want to. And so you want to provide the elected official or the staffer. So a lot of times you do meet with staffers, and these people are just as important as the elected officials, because like I said before, they work with one another very intimately and very closely. And so you want to reiterate your ask on the issue. Next slide. And so the meeting concludes, right? And when the meeting ends, you're asking to take a picture with the individual and doing those things. So once you ask for the picture, make sure you post it and make sure you say thank you for what it is that they are doing. If you're uncomfortable, like people can run that with you. A lot of times now they're doing a lot of Zoom meetings, kind of like this. So there are a lot of elected officials doing Zoom, which is so, I'm gonna be honest, is way less intimidating than being in an office in that cramped room, which is like the size of like somebody's like bathroom, and then you're all in there. So it's not as intimidating really as it kind of used to be. And I always tell people it's not that hard to lobby, right? Like you lobby on little things, like when you're asking people to watch a show you like, right? When you're talking about a show or a movie, you're saying everything and every reason why somebody should watch that. And so it's no different when you're lobbying about this. The material itself may be kind of intimidating, but the reality is you're used to doing it, right? You're used to doing it, right? And so that's really important. And so you just want to make sure that you're kind of doing that, right? So I don't know if I don't think I have any more slides, right? No, I don't have any more slides. So I don't know right now if you have any questions for me. Sorry for the loudness towards the end. My babies are hitting that we want to go to sleep moment really soon. I think they're getting to that place of tiredness at the moment. I tried to put them down before this. They weren't working with me. They were like, no, lady.
I just want to
Ebony,
say,
one
Ebony,
thing, you said questions, but one of the things, I guess this was great, and our group 37 has lobbied, both, I can never remember the name of the thing that we're talking about, and also the immigration thing. One thing that Amnesty does not work with us on is when we lobby people, all of our congressional members, we talk to their aides, and they don't let us know what kind of membership is outstate, but we still lobby those representatives just to talk to them about this, but they're aware that we're all the city folk. And if we could even if Amnesty would let the people outstate know that there is this group 37 and that we're working on this stuff, and we've been trying for years to have this happen, then we would have constituents at some of those Zoom meetings. And I just want to also say that I have found lobbying the congressional aides of Republicans we learn the most from, because they would kind of want us to frame some things differently. And there was one congressional representative, Fishbach, who in that district, they couldn't do the immigration case, but on a personal level, I was so surprised that Fishbach was doing a lot of work on an individual level with immigration. She wasn't promoting the big picture, but she was helping a lot of people who were kind of, in trouble and stuff like that. So I found that really interesting. And Emmer's aide was just brilliant, and he would talk about things. So we learned a lot from. I would just encourage people, to lobby, especially the aides of some of these other representatives, because they're smarter than the representatives sometimes. And they know the inner work. So anyway, I'm talking too much here. But
You know,
that's what I would
Miss
say.
Debbie, you make the greatest point ever, right? Because what people don't understand, right, is somebody is writing the congressperson's talking points or the senator's talking points, and it is the aide. Like, they're not writing this stuff, and so, and what happens to, like, I've had meetings where I know for me, I've had a couple of meetings. Like, I remember we were doing like reproductive rights, and I think I went to Blumenthal's office, and when I was in Blumenthal's office, the aide told me particular things that I went back to government relations and was like, look, like, the aide told me this state is on the fence, but they need somebody to do X, Y, and Z. So I know people going in there, so you might want to tell them this is what they need to say, right? But you had this inside, right, that you would never have. And as always, like, a lot of the aides are shuffled around and have nothing to do with like party lines. They're just shuffling because they're working. And so some of them have gone from Republican offices to Democratic offices. And so the insight is very different. And I think we want to see the congressperson so much that we just don't understand how important it is when you're talking to like the person's aide that runs immigration, right? Because that's what they eat, breathe, and live while they're at work every day. And so they know the ins and outs in ways that you just would never get. And so if you ever run into that, right, that's why that I can put that in the chat for you right now, the grassroots at AIUSA.org. If in fact you ever run into that grassroots at AIUSA.org. If you ever run into that situation where you're working on stuff that's outside of your area, if you email AIUSA, the grassroots email, if you email that, they can put you in contact with someone that, like, the legislative coordinator in the state that you're talking about, that can then lobby mobilize the constituents they have in an area to do what it is that you're asking to do. So really what's happening is legislative coordinators play a really important role.
Coordinator is part of our group. So I talked to him. I have his phone number memorized because he's helped me get this computer. I mean, it's like, so we're in close. It isn't like he's far away. He's, within a bike ride distance away from me. So he's part of my same district. So, we need is constituent. If you were saying, oh, great grassroots, I was hoping you had other activists from northern Minnesota on that list.
They would, and so if your legislative coordinator asks for that information, they would be able to give it to them. So they would, or the office itself would be able to blast it. So that's why it's really important. So for us as legislative coordinators, we have quick what are they called? Quick reports, monthly reports. So those would be the places that you would log that information, or you would just email and they would actually go in and do that for you. So the thing is, they can't legally at this point give out people's emails because it's some funky stuff going on. So they can't do that. But if in fact you need that information, there is a way in which I forgot what this section is called, where they can actually blast that information and do it for you. So he would just have to reach out. But there is that's the way it would have to do. But if you tell him you need it, then he can do that part for you if you're trying to find folks. And if if they don't know how to do that, whoever your legislative coordinator is, they are more than welcome to email me, because I do sit on the legislative steering committee, legislative coordinator steering committee. So if that's a problem, then you can just kind of email that to me later, and that's something I'll bring up in the meeting about people trying to mobilize a little better, and we'll bring that up on our monthly legislative coordinator call on December 4th about just reminding folks how they can use us to get that blast information they need.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I think that's a great organizing strategy.
All right. First of all, Ebony, I just want to say thank you so much. And like, you are amazing. So yeah. And So any other questions for Ebony or Ernest? We talked a little bit about framing gun violence as a human rights the crisis in the United States. We talked about the HEROES campaign, really looking at community-funded programs to prevent and end gun violence in the US. And those are proven effective strategies to prevent and they have been proven effective in funding community-based work. And Ebony talked a little bit about the approach in Connecticut, really working with youth and mobilizing in communities outside of youth communities as well. Amnesty International has a student program where we engage youth in our End Gun Violence campaign. We have a community networks program which engages community groups, local groups that Debbie has referred to across the country. These are groups that have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in their community and work to advocate for human rights. They are Amnesty in those communities. So if you are interested in getting more involved, Ernest said that we have, we're on a timeline here to really get the House to pass the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. So Ernest is going to drop a link in the chat to ongoing work around the HEROES campaign, as well as an action. Tomorrow would be a good time to call your state rep and ask them to support Break the Cycle of Violence. Do I have that correct, Ernest?
Yes, you do.
So, and if you're looking for information about who your state rep is, you can feel free to reach out to me. You can also go to there's a website I'm going to put in the chat where you can actually go in and look up who your state rep is. People need to hear from you.
And
So,
also,
yeah.
if you go on the state website, if you go on the Amnesty website, when there's time to actually send letters, there's this nice new thing we have called Quorum. And Quorum actually, when you put your zip code in, actually tells you who your person is, and then you just type your name in and it sends all the letters for you. It's an amazing type of situation. But when you go on the if you sign up for lobbying, they will actually give you access to that website, and that website actually gives you all your people in your area, from your congressional people to your state people to your actual senators. So it is a great tool. So that is there for you as well.
Great. I am dropping in the chat right now the link to find your rep. And you don't have to be a voting age to call your rep. You have a lot of power if you're not a voting age, because you will be one day, and you also have a lot of influence, and Congress people know that. So Ernest dropped his email in the chat. He is the manager of the End Gun Violence campaign. If you want to get more involved, learn more about other ways to work to end gun violence in your community, you can also reach out to Ebony, who again really led some amazing work in Connecticut and continues to really serve as a role model for other activists across the country. If you have any other questions, please feel free to come off mute. Otherwise, I just want to thank you for spending Monday night with us. And I want to thank Ebony and Ernest for providing your expertise and your own experience. And Ebony, I just want to tip my hat off to you and those beautiful babies you have. So thank you. And I know that it probably took a lot. So thank you.
Your kids are wonderful. I just loved watching them. It's such a breath of fresh air for a 70-year-old woman in the winter to just see little kids. I love their voices.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, and you gave us hope. You don't basically have work and home right now. It's an interconnected passion of activism. So thank you all for being here tonight to share your experiences. And I think this has just been a fantastic session. I want to say, well, two commendations for my own learning. I really have learned a ton within the last 2 years on this legislative activism, because I, like Debbie are from Minneapolis on the group 37 and have been able to go on to these Zooms with others. And so it's a whole new way of sharing and learning with our kind of legislative assistants. So I think what you're saying, Ebony, yes, it gets me really excited. And the legislation that you're talking about, Ernest, for us putting forward, I think it's really important. And I wanted to just say one thing, and maybe it's a way for you all to go and reflect on this, because I was yesterday in a conversation with a number of gun owners, and there was a young person, and I felt like they had your talking points, each and every one they were ticking off, because usually I'm the one who's like, well, June, so the first point had been, well, wait a minute, everyone wants to take away our guns. And she said, well, I don't know of people talking about that. Obviously there are hunters and, the responsible gun ownership. And then they were leaning into, oh, well, everyone wants to do this or that. And she had really, like your bulleted point, like the NRA, even the knowledge that NRA had decreased some of, or didn't want to fund research in this area, and so there's been, opportunities to say, well, wait, don't we want to think about creative solutions and research? So anyhow, I just felt like there was a young person who, was really trying to talk back in a good, respectful way of recognizing some of the challenges ahead of us. So I really do think young people are a core aspect of hopefully engaging in this work as well. So thank you all. And I don't know if there's any, go around last minute words of wisdom of how you all keep going and in the work that you can give us here, but thank you very much.
I mean, I think it's just, you just gotta go with it. I mean, I've been doing it for a while, and so, I mean, I think it's one of those things, like, you just kind of figure out, like, how it works best for you and what that means for you and how you do it. So, I mean, you find balance, right? I find balance in understanding that a lot of this is close to home. And so my state work has meant a lot to me because it's my state, right? Like, my kids maybe will probably grow up here, and if they do, like, I want it to be a halfway decent place. I teach here, my roots are here, right? And so I'm a high school teacher, I teach sped, I have my kids, and so it's one of those things, like, you just see, at least for me, how this affects, like, young people. Like, no teenager should have to bury their friend. Like, that's crazy. When you're in high school and a little black dress is a part of your wardrobe, like, where do we do that at? Because you have to worry about that. And so, I mean, looking at it from that perspective, right, is like, even if you're not necessarily winning at a national level, there are things you can do that directly affect your community where you live. And those are the pieces, I think, as Amnesty starts to shift and allow people to do that state work and taking those federal issues and putting them at their state, that will be very attractive moving forward, because you can make that immediate impact where you live.